Billionaire CEO's contract wife hides virgin secret, but her twin sister knows the truth. I'm saying your experienced wife, your perfect business partner who could handle a marriage without messy emotions, is actually a 28-year-old virgin who's been desperately trying not to fall in love with her own husband. The silence that followed was deafening. Damien Blackthorne, one of the world's most powerful CEOs, went completely still, his steel-gray eyes searching his wife's face as the confession hung between them like a live wire. A virgin, he repeated, his voice dropping to a rough whisper that sent shivers down Natalia's spine. But here's the thing that will blow your mind. This wasn't just any confession. This was a woman admitting to her billionaire husband that their entire 6-month marriage was built on the most elaborate lie you've ever heard. And her identical twin sister was about to use this secret to destroy everything. What happens when the one person who's supposed to protect you becomes your greatest threat? When the sister who shares your face decides to steal your life? And when a contract marriage turns into real love just as everything starts falling apart? This story will teach you why authenticity always wins over deception, how real love sees through every lie, and why sometimes the truth we're most afraid to tell is exactly what sets us free. But first, let me take you back to where this incredible journey began, because you need to understand how a brilliant woman with a doctorate in psychology ended up living the biggest lie of her life. The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the marble floor of the penthouse ballroom as Natalia Reeves adjusted her silk evening gown, her fingers trembling slightly against the champagne flute. The sound of elegant conversation and classical music filled the air, but all she could hear was the thundering of her own heartbeat. Tonight marked 6 months of marriage to Damien Blackthorne, and she was still living the most elaborate lie of her life. 6 months ago, Natalia had been Dr. Natalia Reeves, a brilliant psychology professor struggling to pay for her father's experimental cancer treatment. The research facility in Switzerland offered hope, but at a cost that would have taken her 20 years to save. That's when Damien's representatives approached her with an offer that seemed too good to be true. A contract marriage. 2 years of playing the perfect CEO's wife in exchange for $10 million. No emotional complications, no real intimacy required, just sophisticated companionship and the right image for his board of directors. The problem was, they wanted someone experienced, worldly, confident in high society. Everything Natalia wasn't. So she lied. She created an elaborate backstory of sophisticated relationships, worldly experiences, and casual confidence with wealthy men. She studied etiquette videos, memorized wine pairings, and practiced walking in designer heels until her feet bled. She became someone else entirely. "You look radiant tonight, Mrs. Blackthorne." The familiar voice behind her sent ice through her veins. Natalia turned slowly, her practiced smile faltering for just a moment as she faced her identical twin sister, Sophia. They shared the same honey gold hair, the same emerald green eyes, the same delicate bone structure that had made modeling agencies fight over them in their youth. But where Natalia had chosen academia and a quiet life, Sophia had embraced the spotlight and everything that came with it. "Sophia," Natalia breathed, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I didn't know you were invited." Sophia's smile didn't reach her eyes as she sipped her champagne, studying Natalia with the calculating gaze of a predator sizing up prey. "Damien's assistant added me to the guest list last week. Something about keeping family close." Her fingers traced the rim of her wine glass, a gesture Natalia recognized as dangerous from their childhood. "We need to talk. Privately." Before Natalia could respond, a familiar warmth pressed against her lower back. Damien's hand settled possessively on her waist, his tall frame radiating the controlled power that had built his empire from nothing. At 34, he commanded every room he entered, his steel-gray eyes missing nothing, his dark hair perfectly styled even after 12-hour days running Blackthorne Industries. "Ladies," his deep voice rumbled with polite interest, though Natalia felt the subtle tension in his posture. "I don't believe I've had the pleasure. This is my twin sister, Sophia," Natalia managed, hyper-aware of how her pulse quickened whenever Damien touched her. 6 months of marriage, and she still felt like a teenager with her first crush. It was a complication she definitely hadn't planned for. Damien's eyes sharpened as he studied Sophia, taking in the identical features with analytical precision. Remarkable resemblance. You could have warned me you had a twin, darling. The endearment, spoken for their audience, still made Natalia's heart flutter traitorously. Family can be complicated, Sophia interjected smoothly, her smile turning predatory. Perhaps we could step out onto the terrace. I'd love to hear how you two really met. Natalia's blood ran cold. Their fabricated love story had been carefully crafted to satisfy the media and Damien's board of directors. A chance meeting at a charity auction, months of courtship before their whirlwind romance. But Sophia knew the truth about everything, including the virgin secret that would destroy the sophisticated image Natalia had cultivated. Another time, Damien's voice carried subtle dismissal, his protective instincts clearly triggered by something in Sophia's demeanor. I believe they're about to announce dinner. As if summoned by his words, the sound of crystal being tapped echoed through the ballroom. Damien's hand pressed more firmly against Natalia's waist, guiding her toward their table, but not before she caught Sophia's whispered words. We'll finish this conversation later, sister. After all, some secrets are too delicious to keep. If you're already hooked by this family drama and wondering how this is all going to unfold, smash that like button because this story is about to take some incredible twists that will leave you questioning everything you think you know about love, lies, and family loyalty. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced smiles and careful conversations. Natalia played her part perfectly, the sophisticated wife who could discuss art, politics, and business with equal ease. But inside, she was falling apart. Every time she caught sight of Sophia across the room, her sister's knowing smile sent fresh waves of panic through her system. Damien seemed to sense her distress, his hand finding hers under the table, his thumb stroking across her knuckles in a gesture that was becoming far too familiar and comforting. She had to remind herself constantly that this was all an act, that the tender looks and protective touches were just part of their performance. Even though lately, the lines between performance and reality had begun to blur in ways that terrified her. Are you all right? Damien murmured during a lull in conversation, his lips close enough to her ear that she could feel his warm breath. To anyone watching, it looked like an intimate moment between newlyweds. But the genuine concern in his voice made her chest tighten with emotions she couldn't afford to feel. Just tired, she lied, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. How many lies had she told in the past 6 months? How many times had she pretended to be someone she wasn't? The weight of all that deception was crushing her. The truth was, Natalia had never been in a real relationship. Her teenage years had been spent studying, her college years focused on academic achievements, and her early 20s dedicated to earning her doctorate. While other women her age were dating and exploring relationships, she'd been buried in psychology textbooks and research papers. The sophisticated woman of the world that Damien thought he'd married was pure fiction. And now, watching him interact with their guests, seeing the respect and admiration in people's eyes when they looked at them together, she realized how much she was going to lose when the truth came out. Because it wasn't just about the money anymore. Somewhere in the past 6 months, between shared dinners and comfortable silences, she'd done the one thing their contract specifically forbade. She'd fallen in love with her own husband. The penthouse felt cavernous after the evening's guests departed, luxury and silence combining into something almost oppressive. Natalia stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows, still in her evening gown, watching the city lights blur through tears she refused to shed. The Manhattan skyline stretched endlessly before her, each light representing someone living their authentic life while she remained trapped in her elaborate deception. Behind her, she heard the soft clink of crystal as Damien poured 2 glasses of wine. Even in these quiet moments, he maintained the careful distance that had characterized their entire marriage. They shared a bed but slept on opposite sides. They kissed for public appearances but never when they were alone. They lived like polite strangers bound by a contract, and it was killing her. Your sister is interesting, he said carefully, approaching with measured steps. His bow tie hung loosened around his neck, his formal jacket discarded, making him look more human and less like the untouchable CEO the world saw. Natalia accepted the wine but didn't turn around. She couldn't bear to see those steel-gray eyes analyzing her, trying to figure out what was wrong. "She's dangerous. To our arrangement?" His question held layers of meaning that made her chest tighten painfully. Our arrangement. 6 months of marriage, and he still spoke of it in business terms, even as his eyes had begun to follow her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Even as his casual touches had become more frequent, more lingering, more like a real husband's caresses. "To everything," she whispered, finally facing him. The soft lighting of their living room painted shadows across his angular features, making him look younger, more vulnerable. This was the version of him she'd fallen in love with somewhere between their carefully platonic kisses and shared quiet dinners. The man who forgot to eat when he was working, who unconsciously reached for her hand during movie nights, who looked at her sometimes like she was something precious he was afraid to break. "Tell me," he commanded softly, setting down his glass and moving closer with the predatory grace that had made him one of the most feared negotiators in corporate America. "What hold does she have over you?" Natalia's laugh came out bitter and broken. "You married me because you needed a wife with the right background, the right image. Someone sophisticated enough to handle your social obligations, intelligent enough to understand your world, and experienced enough not to develop messy emotional complications." His jaw tensed at her words, something flickering in his eyes that she couldn't quite read. "Natalia. She knows I lied about all of it." The words rushed out before she could stop them, 6 months of fear and guilt finally breaking free. The sophisticated ex-boyfriends, the worldly experiences, the casual confidence you thought you were getting when you chose me. None of it's real. Damien went very still, his gray eyes intense as they searched her face. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications and unspoken truths. She could see him processing her words, his brilliant mind working through all the ramifications. "What exactly are you saying?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled. Heat flooded her cheeks, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. If she was going to confess, she might as well confess everything. "I'm saying your experienced wife, your perfect business partner who could handle a marriage without messy emotions, is actually a 28-year-old virgin who's been desperately trying not to fall in love with her own husband." The admission hung between them like a bridge she could never cross back over. There it was, the truth that had been eating her alive for months. The secret that made her feel like a fraud every time someone complimented their sophisticated love story. Damien's reaction was not what she expected. Instead of anger or disgust, something that looked like hunger flashed in his eyes before he carefully masked it. "A virgin," he repeated, his voice dropping to a rough whisper that sent unexpected heat through her body. She nodded, unable to speak past the humiliation burning in her throat. This was it. This was the moment he would call off their arrangement, send her back to her old life with nothing but the memory of 6 months spent pretending to be someone else. "And you've been what exactly? Pretending experience you don't have. Hiding behind sophistication that doesn't exist." "I needed the money," she whispered, the confession spilling out like poison she'd been carrying too long. "My father's medical bills, the experimental treatment in Switzerland that might save his life. I would have agreed to anything when your people approached me about the arrangement. I knew I wasn't what you really wanted, but I thought I could fake it well enough to get through 2 years." Damien moved closer, each step deliberate and predatory, until she could smell his expensive cologne and see the storm building in his gray eyes. "What I wanted," he said quietly, his voice carrying a dangerous edge, "was a woman who wouldn't complicate my life with emotional demands." Her heart cracked at his words, the confirmation of everything she'd feared. "I know. I'm sorry I couldn't keep my end of the bargain. I'm sorry I couldn't be the sophisticated woman you needed. I'm sorry I couldn't stop myself from." "You couldn't what?" He was close enough now that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his irises and the way his pupils had dilated. "Couldn't keep yourself from responding when I kiss you for appearances. Couldn't hide the way your breath catches when I touch you. Couldn't pretend indifference when I'm fighting every instinct I have to claim what's mine. The possessive heat in his voice made her knees weak, made her question everything she thought she understood about their arrangement. "Damien, what are you saying?" His hands came up to frame her face, thumbs stroking her cheekbones with devastating gentleness. The touch was nothing like the careful, public gestures they'd shared before. This was intimate, real, full of barely controlled desire. "Did you really think I didn't know?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "That I couldn't feel how you tremble when I hold you, see how you watch me when you think I'm not looking, notice how you unconsciously lean toward me during meetings like you're drawn to me against your will." Her breath caught as his words sank in. "You knew. I suspected from our wedding night, when you looked at me with those innocent eyes, and I realized I'd married an angel pretending to be experienced." His thumbs continued their gentle stroking, each touch sending electricity through her nervous system. "You bite your lip when you're nervous, you unconsciously smooth your dress when you're uncomfortable, and you have this little crease between your eyebrows when you're trying to remember something you've memorized rather than something you've lived. You said no complications," she whispered, her world tilting as everything she thought she knew shifted beneath her feet. "I lied." The admission was rough, honest, everything she'd dreamed of hearing but never dared hope for. "I've wanted to complicate everything between us since our third dinner together, when you forgot to be sophisticated for 5 minutes and told me about your father's workshop where he taught you to fix engines. That was the real you, and she was magnificent." Before she could process his words fully, he was kissing her. But this wasn't like the careful, chaste kisses they'd shared for public consumption. This was deep and demanding, full of 6 months of careful restraint finally breaking free. His mouth moved against hers with passionate intensity, claiming and possessing in a way that made her understand exactly how much control he'd been exercising all these months. When they finally parted, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers. The careful distance that had defined their marriage was gone, replaced by something electric and dangerous and real. "Your sister," he murmured against her lips, his voice still rough with desire. "What exactly does she know?" Reality crashed back over Natalia like ice water. For a moment, lost in Damien's kiss and unexpected confession, she'd forgotten about the threat hanging over their heads. "Everything," she whispered, the fear rushing back full force. "She knows about my virginity, about my feelings for you, about how I've been terrified you'd discover the truth and end our marriage." Something dangerous flickered in his gray eyes, the protective instincts she'd glimpsed earlier now fully engaged. "And she's threatening exposure. She wants money. A lot of it. And she wants," Natalia swallowed hard, hating herself for what she had to say next, "she wants you." Damien's grip tightened possessively on her face, his expression turning predatory in a way that reminded her why he was so successful in the cutthroat world of corporate mergers. "She can't have either." The conviction in his voice sent a thrill through her even as fear continued to claw at her chest. "Damien, you don't understand. If she exposes everything, your board will question your judgment. The sophisticated power couple image we've built will crumble. Your investors will." "Let me worry about my investors," he interrupted, his voice carrying the same steel that had built his empire. "Right now, I'm more concerned about my wife. My wife. Not our arrangement, not the contract, not the business partnership. My wife." The possessive pronoun sent heat spiraling through her chest even as her logical mind tried to remind her that this could all be part of damage control. Comment below and tell me, have you ever had to hide your true self to fit into someone else's expectations? Because what Natalia was about to learn is that sometimes our greatest vulnerabilities become our most powerful strengths, but first, she had to survive her sister's devastating betrayal. The next morning arrived with all the subtle menace of a gathering storm. Sophia appeared at their penthouse door at precisely 10 a.m., dressed in designer clothes that Natalia knew cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her twin sister moved through their living space like she owned it, settling onto the Italian leather sofa with the casual confidence of someone who held all the cards. "I must say, brother-in-law," Sophia purred, her emerald eyes holding mischief and malice in equal measure as she studied Damien over her coffee cup. "You have exquisite taste in women. Though I suspect you didn't know exactly what you were getting when you chose my sweet, innocent sister." Damien sat across from her, every line of his powerful body radiating controlled menace. His arm draped possessively around Natalia's shoulders, a claiming gesture that hadn't been there before last night's revelations. The careful distance of their contract marriage had been replaced by something that felt dangerously real. "What do you want, Sophia?" His voice carried the Arctic chill that had made grown men tremble in boardrooms across 3 continents. Straight to business. I like that quality in a man. Sophia's smile sharpened like a blade as she leaned back, perfectly at ease despite the tension crackling through the room. $5 million, and I disappear forever. Natalia keeps her precious secrets, you keep your perfect wife, and everyone stays happy in their little fantasy. And if we refuse? Natalia asked, proud that her voice remained steady despite the fear clawing at her chest like a living thing. Sophia pulled out her phone, scrolling through what looked like photographs and documents with theatrical precision. "Then I make some very interesting phone calls. To the society papers who love a scandal, to your board of directors who value stability above all else, to your investors who are already nervous about market volatility. Can you imagine how fascinated they'll be to discover that the Ice King's sophisticated wife is actually a sheltered little virgin who's been playing dress-up?" The casual cruelty in her sister's voice was like a physical blow. This was the woman who had once shared secrets and dreams, who had promised they'd always protect each other no matter what. Now she was wielding Natalia's vulnerabilities like weapons, ready to destroy everything for money and spite. Damien's hand tightened on Natalia's shoulder, his voice turning arctic. "You're assuming I'd care about such revelations." "Oh, but you would," Sophia countered with false sympathy, her research clearly thorough and devastating. "See, I did my homework before coming here. Your board requirements for the CEO position, married and stable with a wife who can handle the social demands. Your investors' documented concerns about your bachelor lifestyle affecting the company's family-friendly image. Your ex-fiancé's very public interview about how you're emotionally unavailable and incapable of real intimacy." She paused to sip her coffee, savoring their tension like fine wine. Poor Natalia's sweet virginal confession would destroy the narrative you've both worked so hard to build. The sophisticated power couple becomes a joke. The frigid CEO who can't even properly claim his own wife. The desperate woman who lied her way into a billionaire's bed but was too inexperienced to keep him interested. Rage flashed in Damien's eyes, but before he could speak, Natalia stood gracefully. 6 months of pretending to be someone else had taught her how to mask her emotions, how to think clearly under pressure. And right now, she needed every skill she'd learned. "You're right about one thing, Sophia," she said conversationally, moving to the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a stunning view of Manhattan. "Some secrets are indeed too delicious to keep." Both Sophia and Damien looked at her with surprise, but Natalia's mind was working with the analytical precision that had earned her a doctorate in psychology. She'd spent years studying human behavior, understanding motivation and manipulation. Her sister might think she held all the cards, but she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated the quiet sister she'd always overshadowed. "Tell me, sister dear," Natalia continued, her voice carrying the calm authority she'd once used in lecture halls, "how exactly did you gather all this intelligence about Damien's business dealings? The board requirements, the investor concerns, the intimate details of corporate policy that aren't public knowledge." For the first time since arriving, Sophia's confidence flickered slightly. "I have my sources." "I'm sure you do." Natalia turned back to face them, her professional composure sliding into place like armor. "Sources like Marcus Thorne, perhaps. Damien's former business partner who tried to orchestrate that hostile takeover 2 years ago." The color drained from Sophia's face so quickly that Natalia knew she'd hit her target. Across the room, Damien's expression turned deadly, his gray eyes taking on the predatory focus that had made him one of the most feared corporate raiders in America. "Marcus Thorne," he repeated slowly, each word precise and threatening. Now that's an interesting connection. But Natalia wasn't finished. Years of being overshadowed by her more glamorous sister had taught her to observe, to analyze, to see the patterns that others missed. And she'd been watching Sophia very carefully since her unexpected appearance last night. This confrontation is about to take a turn that nobody saw coming. What happens when the quiet sister finally fights back, and how a desperate gamble becomes the key to everything. Stay with me because you're about to see why sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone underestimates. You see, Natalia continued, moving to stand behind Damien's chair with her hand resting on his shoulder in a gesture of partnership that felt more natural than any of their practiced public displays. While you were researching our vulnerabilities, I was researching yours. Your sudden lifestyle upgrade, that new penthouse apartment in Soho, your designer wardrobe that costs more than most people make in a year. All funded by someone with very deep pockets and a very specific agenda. Sophia's perfectly manicured facade was cracking, but she tried to maintain her composure. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you do. Natalia's voice carried the calm authority of someone who had spent years analyzing human behavior, understanding the psychology behind manipulation and deception. Marcus wants to destroy Damien's reputation, create instability in his marriage, and position himself to swoop in during the chaos. Using you to threaten exposure was brilliant, really. Create a scandal about the CEO's marriage, raise questions about his judgment, his stability, his ability to lead the company. Damien's hand covered hers where it rested on his shoulder, warm and strong and completely trusting. The gesture spoke of partnership, of two people united against a common threat. And you figured this out how? Because I know my sister, Natalia said softly, meeting Sophia's panicked eyes with a mixture of sadness and steel. She's never been interested in disappearing quietly. She's always wanted the spotlight, the attention, the drama. $5 million to go away and never be heard from again. That's not Sophia at all. That's someone else's plan, someone who needs her gone once she's served her purpose. The silence in the room was thick with tension as the truth settled over them like a heavy blanket. Sophia's confident mask was completely gone now, replaced by the desperate look of someone whose carefully laid plans were crumbling around them. Besides, Natalia added with devastating calm, I called the Swiss medical facility yesterday. Funny thing about experimental cancer treatments. They keep very detailed records of their patients and their families. Imagine my surprise when they told me that someone had already paid my father's full treatment costs 6 months ago. Someone who requested complete anonymity but left very specific instructions about ongoing care. Damien's grip on her hand tightened, and she could feel his surprise even though he remained outwardly composed. She hadn't told him about this discovery, hadn't had time to process what it meant herself. The payment came from a shell corporation that took me most of the night to trace, Natalia continued, her voice growing stronger with each revelation. But eventually, all roads led back to Marcus Thorne Industries. He's been funding my father's treatment, my sister's lifestyle, probably even her information gathering. The question is, why would he do that unless he needed something from both of us? Sophia finally cracked completely, standing abruptly as her carefully constructed lies fell apart. You always were too smart for your own good, she spat, the venom in her voice revealing the jealousy and resentment that had been festering for years. Yes, fine. Marcus offered me money to seduce your husband, to create a scandal that would destroy your marriage and his reputation. When that didn't work, apparently the Ice King is more loyal than anyone expected, we decided to use your precious secret instead. But here's what I don't understand, Natalia pressed, her psychological training helping her see the deeper patterns in her sister's behavior. Why would you agree to destroy your own family for money? What did Marcus promise you that was worth betraying your own blood? Sophia's laugh was bitter and broken. You want to know the truth, sister. You want to understand why I'd do this to you. It's because I've spent my entire life watching you be everything I could never be. The smart one, the accomplished one, the one everyone was proud of. Do you know what it's like to be the shallow twin, the pretty one with nothing else to offer? The pain in Sophia's voice was real, and for a moment, Natalia saw past the manipulation to the hurt that had been driving her sister's actions. But understanding didn't excuse the betrayal, and it certainly didn't change what had to happen next. So when Marcus approached me with his plan, Sophia continued, her composure completely shattered now, when he showed me how much money I could make and how I could finally have something you couldn't, I said yes. He promised me Damien would leave you once your lies were exposed. He promised me I could have the billionaire husband, the perfect life, everything that should have been mine. Should have been yours. Damien's voice was deadly quiet as he stood, his full height and presence suddenly dominating the room. Based on what exactly? Your willingness to betray family. Your talent for manipulation and deception. Your complete lack of loyalty or honor. He moved towards Sophia with predatory grace, and she actually took a step back, finally realizing that she'd pushed the wrong man too far. You want to know what I find most interesting about this whole situation, Sophia? It's that you assumed I'd be embarrassed by my wife's innocence. The possessive way he said "my wife" sent heat spiraling through Natalia's chest, but she forced herself to focus on the confrontation unfolding before them. You see, Damien continued, his voice carrying the cold authority that had built his empire, you made the same mistake that most people make when they try to manipulate me. You assumed I think like everyone else. That I value experience over authenticity, sophistication over sincerity, worldliness over genuine emotion. He turned to pull Natalia into his arms, his kiss deep and claiming, completely unashamed of the passion between them. When they parted, his eyes blazed with possessive pride that took her breath away. You want to know a secret, Sophia? He murmured, his voice carrying clearly through the room. I've never wanted anything more than I want to be the only man who ever touches her. Her virginity isn't a weakness or an embarrassment. It's a gift, and I'll destroy anyone who tries to use it against us. The declaration sent shockwaves through Natalia's system. This wasn't just damage control or public relations. This was a man claiming his woman, protecting what was his with the same ruthless efficiency he brought to business. Now, Damien's voice turned arctic as he focused on Sophia again. You have exactly 1 hour to pack whatever you came to the city with and get on the first flight to anywhere that isn't here. Marcus Thorne's assets are being frozen as we speak, his offices are being raided by federal agents for industrial espionage, and his ability to fund your lifestyle has just permanently ended. Sophia's face went white. You can't do that. I already have. Damien's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. You see, while you were playing your little games, I was making phone calls. Turns out, corporate espionage, attempted extortion, and conspiracy to commit fraud are serious federal crimes. Marcus is looking at 20 to 30 years in prison, and his co-conspirators are facing similar charges. Co-conspirators, Sophia whispered, the word hanging in the air like a death sentence. Unless, of course, they cooperate fully with the investigation, Natalia added, understanding the game her husband was playing. Provide testimony, evidence, complete cooperation in exchange for immunity and a chance to start over somewhere else. If you love seeing the underdog win and justice served, hit that subscribe button because this story is about to show you how real love conquers every obstacle and why authenticity always triumphs over deception. Sophia looked between them, seeing her options clearly for the first time. Federal prison or exile, disgrace or a chance to rebuild her life somewhere else. It wasn't really a choice at all. I'll take the deal, she whispered, all her fight finally gone. I'll testify against Marcus, provide whatever evidence you need, and then I'll disappear. But I want something in return. You're hardly in a position to negotiate, Damien pointed out coldly. Not from you, Sophia said, looking directly at Natalia. From her. I want to know that our father is really okay, that his treatment is working, that I didn't destroy our family for nothing. The genuine pain in her sister's voice broke through Natalia's anger, reminding her of the girl Sophia used to be before jealousy and resentment poisoned everything between them. He's responding well to the treatment, she said quietly. The doctors are optimistic. He asks about you sometimes. Tears finally broke through Sophia's composure, years of hurt and jealousy spilling over. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words barely audible. "I'm so sorry for all of it. I wanted to matter to someone the way you matter to everyone. I wanted to be special instead of just the pretty twin." "You were special," Natalia said softly, her heart breaking for the relationship they'd lost. "You were my sister, my other half. That should have been enough." "But it wasn't," Sophia replied with devastating honesty. "And now it's too late." 3 hours later, Sophia was on a plane to Paris with a new identity, a modest settlement that would let her start over, and a federal immunity deal that would keep her out of prison. Marcus Thorne was in federal custody, his assets frozen, his empire crumbling under the weight of investigations that would take years to resolve. And Natalia stood on their penthouse terrace, watching the sun set over Manhattan, trying to process everything that had happened. The threat was gone, her father was safe, and her marriage was no longer built on lies and contracts. But what did that mean for their future? Regrets? Damien's voice was soft as he joined her at the railing, his jacket discarded, his shirt sleeves rolled up in a way that made him look more human and less like the untouchable CEO the world saw. About Sophia. Yes. About everything else. She turned to face him, her heart in her throat. No regrets at all. His hands came up to frame her face with the same reverent gentleness he'd shown the night before. "I need you to understand something," he said quietly, his thumb tracing her lower lip. "This arrangement, our marriage, it stopped being about business the moment I realized you were falling asleep to the sound of my voice during our video calls because you felt safe with me." Her breath caught. "You noticed that?" "I noticed everything." His voice grew rougher with emotion. "How you bite your lip when you're nervous, how you unconsciously lean toward me during meetings, how your cheeks flush when I compliment you. How you look at me like I'm something precious instead of something to be endured." Damien, his name was a plea on her lips. "I want you, Natalia," he continued, his gray eyes burning with an intensity that made her knees weak. "Not the experienced woman you pretended to be, not the sophisticated wife our contract called for. I want the woman who reads romance novels and hides them behind financial reports, who talks to herself when she's working through problems, who looks at me like I could be her hero instead of just her husband." Tears sparkled in her eyes, but her smile was radiant. "You want to be my hero." His laugh was shaky, vulnerable in a way she'd never heard before. "God, yes. I want to be your everything. Your first lover, your last love, your partner in every way that matters. I want to show you what it means to be cherished, protected, worshipped the way you deserve." She rose on her tiptoes, her arms winding around his neck as she pressed her body against his. "Then claim me," she whispered against his lips. "Make me truly yours. Show me what I've been missing all these months." The kiss that followed was different from all the others. Deeper, hungrier, full of 6 months of restraint finally breaking free. Damien's hands tangled in her hair, angling her head to deepen the connection, and she melted into him with a soft moan that nearly undid his legendary control. "Are you sure?" he asked against her throat, his lips finding the sensitive spot that made her shiver. "Once we cross this line, there's no going back. No more pretending this is just business. No more separate sides of the bed. No more careful distance." "It was never just business," she confessed breathlessly. "Not for me. I've been in love with you since our third dinner together, when you told me about your father's workshop and got that faraway look in your eyes talking about building something with your hands." His arms tightened around her possessively. "I fell in love with you during our wedding vows, when you looked at me like you meant every word even though you thought it was all pretend." "It wasn't pretend," she said, pulling back to meet his eyes. "Not the important parts. I love you, Damien. Really, truly, completely. I love your brilliant mind and your protective instincts and the way you pretend to be cold but you're actually the most passionate man I've ever met. Then let me show you how much I love you back," he murmured, lifting her into his arms with easy strength. Their bedroom had been carefully neutral for 6 months, a space where they'd maintained the polite fiction of their contract marriage. Tonight, as Damien carried her across the threshold, it felt transformed. Intimate, sacred, theirs in a way it had never been before. He set her down gently beside their king-sized bed, his hands shaking slightly as they traced the delicate straps of her dress. "We don't have to rush," he said softly, reading her nervousness despite her determination. "We have all the time in the world now." "I want to," she assured him, covering his hands with hers. "I trust you completely. I've been dreaming about this moment for months." The simple faith in her words humbled him. This brilliant, beautiful woman who had sacrificed everything to save her father was giving him a gift beyond price. Her first time, her innocence, her complete trust in his hands. "Then let me worship you the way you deserve," he whispered, his lips finding the sensitive spot behind her ear that made her knees weak. What followed was a symphony of gentle discovery, tender touches, and whispered endearments. Damien took his time, mapping every inch of her skin with reverent hands and devoted lips, showing her pleasures she'd only read about in her hidden romance novels. He was patient, thorough, making sure she was ready for each new sensation before taking things deeper. "So beautiful," he murmured against her throat as she arched beneath his touch, her body responding to his skilled caresses in ways that amazed her. "So perfect. So completely mine." "Yours," she agreed breathlessly, her hands tangling in his dark hair as he lavished attention on sensitive places that made her cry out with pleasure. "Always yours." When he finally claimed her completely, joining their bodies with exquisite care, she felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. This wasn't just physical joining, it was soul-deep recognition. Two halves of a whole finally becoming complete. "I love you," she gasped as he began to move, each thrust careful and controlled despite the passion burning in his gray eyes. "I love you too," he replied, his voice rough with emotion and desire. "My wife. My heart. My everything. The only woman I'll ever want." Later, wrapped in silk sheets and each other's arms, they watched the dawn paint the Manhattan skyline in shades of gold and pink. Natalia traced lazy patterns on Damien's chest, marveling at the solid strength of him, the way his heartbeat thundered beneath her palm. "No regrets?" he asked softly, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. She lifted her face to meet his eyes, seeing love and vulnerability there in equal measure. "Only one," she said seriously, watching his expression tighten with concern. "What's that?" Her smile was luminous, full of joy and mischief that made his heart stutter. "That we waited so long to stop pretending this was just a contract." His relieved laughter rumbled through his chest as he rolled her beneath him, covering her mouth in a kiss that tasted like forever and promises and a kind of love that changes everything. "Now, here's what I want you to understand about this incredible story, because it teaches us some of the most important lessons about love, authenticity, and courage that you'll ever hear. First, let's talk about the power of vulnerability." Natalia spent 6 months pretending to be someone she wasn't, living in constant fear that her true self wouldn't be good enough. Sound familiar? How many of us put on masks, pretend to be more experienced, more confident, more sophisticated than we really are because we're afraid that who we truly are isn't enough? But here's the beautiful truth that this story reveals. Damien didn't fall in love with the sophisticated woman Natalia was pretending to be. He fell in love with the real her. The nervous gesture of biting her lip, the way she talked to herself when working through problems, her genuine reactions instead of calculated responses. It was her authenticity, not her performance, that captured his heart. This teaches us something profound about relationships and self-worth. The people who are meant to love us will love us not despite our imperfections, but because of them. Our quirks, our vulnerabilities, our genuine selves are not bugs to be fixed, they're features to be celebrated. Second, this story shows us how fear can become our greatest enemy. Natalia's fear of rejection, of not being good enough, of being discovered as a fraud, almost cost her the greatest love of her life. She was so focused on who she thought she should be that she nearly missed who she actually was becoming. How often do we do this in our own lives? We're so worried about meeting other people's expectations that we forget to be ourselves. We're so afraid of being judged that we judge ourselves before anyone else gets the chance. But here's what Natalia learned, and what we all need to remember. The right person will see past our fears to our hearts. The right love will call out our authenticity, not our performance. Third, let's talk about the difference between transaction and transformation. Natalia and Damien's relationship started as a business arrangement, a contract with clear terms and conditions. But love doesn't respect contracts. Love transforms everything it touches, turning transactions into connections, arrangements into adventures, pretense into passion. Their story shows us that real love isn't about what we can do for each other, it's about who we become when we're together. It's not about filling roles or meeting expectations, it's about growing into the best versions of ourselves through the power of being truly seen and accepted. Fourth, this story teaches us about the courage it takes to be honest. When Natalia finally confessed her virginity and her feelings, she thought she was risking everything. And in a way, she was. She was risking the comfortable lie for the uncertain truth. But that moment of brutal honesty became the foundation for something far more beautiful than anything they built on deception. Truth-telling is terrifying because it makes us vulnerable. But it's also liberating because it frees us from the exhausting work of pretending to be someone else. When we have the courage to show up authentically, we give others permission to do the same. We create space for real intimacy instead of surface-level connection. The story also shows us how betrayal, while painful, can sometimes be the catalyst for breakthrough. Sophia's attempt to destroy Natalia's marriage actually forced both Natalia and Damien to confront their real feelings. Sometimes our greatest challenges become our greatest gifts because they strip away everything that isn't essential and show us what really matters. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that they're enough just as they are, because that's a message we all need to be reminded of sometimes. But let's also talk about forgiveness and redemption, because Sophia's story doesn't end with her defeat. Yes, she betrayed her sister and nearly destroyed everything. But her actions came from a place of deep pain and insecurity, from feeling like she was never good enough, never special, always in her twin's shadow. Natalia's choice to show compassion even in the face of betrayal teaches us something beautiful about grace. She didn't excuse Sophia's actions or pretend they didn't hurt, but she recognized the wounded person behind the destructive behavior. Sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones who are hurting most themselves. This doesn't mean we should accept toxic behavior or stay in harmful relationships. Natalia protected herself and her marriage while still extending compassion to her sister. Boundaries and love aren't opposites, they're partners. We can love someone and still require them to face consequences for their actions. The story also shows us that redemption is possible when people are willing to face the truth about themselves and make different choices. Sophia's exile to Paris isn't just punishment, it's an opportunity to rebuild her life on a foundation of honesty instead of jealousy and manipulation. Finally, let's talk about the epilogue and what it means for all of us. 1 year later, Natalia stood in the nursery of their penthouse, holding their 6-month-old daughter Luna, watching Damien transform from ruthless CEO to devoted father with the same intensity he brought to everything. The room overlooked the same city view where she'd once stood terrified of her sister's threats, but everything had changed. "She has your eyes," Damien murmured, settling behind them on the rocking chair, his arms encircling both his girls in a picture of perfect contentment. "And your stubborn chin," Natalia countered, smiling as Luna's tiny fist closed around her father's finger with surprising strength. The housekeeper knocked softly to announce that Sophia was on the phone from Paris, calling to congratulate them on the baby and share news of her engagement to a French artist who apparently loved her dramatic tendencies and was helping her channel them into theater instead of destruction. "Should I take it?" Natalia asked, surprising herself by feeling more curiosity than anger toward her twin. "If you want to," Damien said simply. "She can't hurt us anymore." And that was true, Natalia realized. The woman who had once held her secrets like weapons now seemed small and distant, unable to touch the fortress of love they'd built together through honesty, trust, and mutual vulnerability. Maybe later, she decided, turning in the circle of her husband's arms to kiss him softly. Right now, I have everything I need. As if in agreement, Luna made a small, contented sound, and they both laughed at their daughter's perfect timing. No more secrets. Damien asked, the question that had become a familiar endearment between them. No more secrets, Natalia confirmed. Just love, truth, and happily ever after. Outside their windows, Manhattan hummed with life and possibility, millions of people pursuing their dreams and facing their fears. But inside their penthouse sanctuary, the former Ice King and his virgin bride had discovered that the greatest truth of all wasn't written in contracts or clauses, but in heartbeats shared, promises kept, and love that transformed everything it touched. Their story had begun with deception and desperation, but it had become something beautiful. A testament to the power of authentic love to conquer fear, heal wounds, and create miracles that no contract could ever guarantee. And in the soft glow of the nursery lamp, surrounded by the quiet sounds of their perfect little family, they knew that this wasn't an ending but a beginning. The first page of a love story that would last forever, built on the unshakable foundation of truth, trust, and the courage to be completely, authentically themselves. So what can we learn from Natalia and Damien's incredible journey? Here are the life-changing truths their story teaches us. First, authenticity always wins over performance in the end. You can pretend to be someone else for a while, but real love recognizes and calls out your true self. The energy it takes to maintain a false identity is exhausting and ultimately unsustainable. When you have the courage to show up as yourself, you attract people who love you for who you are, not who you're pretending to be. Second, vulnerability is not weakness, it's the birthplace of connection. When Natalia finally confessed her fears and insecurities, it didn't drive Damien away, it drew him closer. Our struggles, our imperfections, our fears don't disqualify us from love, they make us human and relatable and real. Third, love transforms everything it touches. What started as a business arrangement became a love story because real love doesn't respect boundaries or contracts. It breaks down walls, heals old wounds, and creates something beautiful from the most unlikely circumstances. Fourth, the truth will set you free, but first it will terrify you. Natalia was afraid that honesty would cost her everything, but it actually gave her everything she'd ever wanted. The things we're most afraid to reveal are often the keys to our greatest breakthroughs. And finally, you are enough exactly as you are. You don't need more experience, more sophistication, more of anything to be worthy of love. Your quirks, your innocence, your genuine reactions are not flaws to be hidden but gifts to be celebrated. If this story has touched your heart, if it's reminded you of your own worth, if it's inspired you to be more authentic in your relationships, then hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Remember, you don't have to pretend to be someone else to be loved. You don't have to earn your worth through performance or perfection. You are valuable, lovable, and enough exactly as you are right now. The right person will see past your fears to your heart, past your flaws to your beauty, past your performance to your authenticity. And when that happens, you'll understand what Natalia learned. That real love doesn't ask you to be different, it helps you become more yourself than you ever thought possible. Subscribe if you want more stories that remind you of your worth, inspire you to live authentically, and show you that every ending is really just a new beginning waiting to unfold. Because your story, just like Natalia's, is still being written. And the most beautiful chapters are yet to come.